Have you ever wondered if a heart could remember someone long before a mind remembered its own name? Dawn had barely begun painting the sky when Grace Bennett stepped onto the dew-covered grass, carrying a small basket of grain beneath her arm. Every morning followed the same quiet rhythm. Open the chicken coop. Scatter the feed. Repair whatever the wind had broken overnight. Smile at the hens as though they were old friends instead of the only family she had left. Since the rejection ceremony 6 months earlier, the little farm on the edge of Pine Hollow had become both her refuge and her prison. The pack that once called her one of their own no longer visited. Children who used to wave now lowered their eyes whenever they passed her fence. Some whispered that a rejected Omega carried bad luck. Others simply pretended she no longer existed. Grace had stopped trying to change their minds. It hurt less to pour kindness into growing vegetables and frightened chickens than into people who had already decided her worth. She reached for the wooden latch of the coop, expecting the usual burst of clucking and fluttering wings. Instead, silence greeted her. Complete, impossible silence. Every feather on the back of her neck stood upright. Her hens were never quiet. Not at sunrise. Not even during storms. Slowly, Grace pushed the door open another few inches. A cool breath of morning air drifted through the narrow opening, carrying the scent of damp earth and something wild. Her heartbeat quickened. The hens were huddled together in the far corner, strangely calm instead of panicked. They weren't hiding from a predator. They were watching one. Curled across the straw-covered floor lay an enormous white wolf unlike anything Grace had ever seen. Moonlight still clung to its thick silver-white fur, making it seem almost luminous in the fading darkness. One powerful foreleg rested protectively across its chest, while dried blood stained the thick coat near its shoulder. Deep claw marks crossed its side, and exhaustion weighed so heavily upon the creature that even its breathing came in slow, uneven waves. Grace should have run. Every lesson she had learned since childhood demanded exactly that. A lone Omega did not approach an injured alpha wolf, especially one large enough to terrify entire hunting parties. Yet something felt wrong. The wolf was sleeping so deeply that a curious brown hen had wandered close enough to peck gently at its tail before wandering away unharmed. If the creature had wanted to kill, not a single chicken would still be alive. Grace swallowed quietly before taking one cautious step inside. Then another. The wolf did not move. She knelt several feet away and noticed fresh thorns embedded near the wounded shoulder. Someone, or something, had driven the magnificent animal through dense forest before it reached her tiny farm. "You must have been running for a very long time," she whispered. Her voice was barely louder than the breeze drifting through the old wooden walls. The wolf's ears twitched. Grace froze. Slowly, painfully, the creature opened a pair of pale silver eyes clouded with confusion rather than aggression. They searched the unfamiliar coop, the frightened hens, the weathered wooden beams, and finally settled on the young woman kneeling nearby. For one endless moment, neither of them moved. Grace expected a growl, a warning, a flash of fangs. Instead, the wolf blinked once as though trying desperately to recognize a world it no longer understood. Confusion replaced instinct. Weariness overcame fear. Then, with a quiet whimper so soft it almost broke her heart, the giant wolf lowered its head back onto the straw. Grace's fear slowly gave way to something stronger. Compassion. She carefully set her basket of grain aside, tore a clean strip from the edge of her old apron, and reached toward the thorn lodge beneath the creature's blood-matted fur. "I don't know who you are," she whispered with gentle honesty, "but no one deserves to suffer alone." The wolf watched her trembling hand without pulling away, while somewhere far beyond the peaceful little farm, royal guards searched forests, rivers, and mountain trails for a missing alpha king whose human body had vanished without a trace 3 nights earlier. Grace Bennett held her breath as her trembling fingers carefully gripped the thorn buried beneath the wolf's snow-white fur. "This will hurt," she whispered apologetically, though she doubted the magnificent creature understood her words. The pale silver eyes remained fixed on hers. There was no warning growl, no flash of fangs, only quiet confusion, as though the wolf was trying to understand why a frightened Omega had chosen compassion instead of fear. Grace slowly pulled the thorn free. The wolf flinched, a low whine escaping its throat before exhaustion silenced the pain once more. Fresh blood welled from the wound, staining the clean strip of cloth she had torn from her apron. "I'm sorry," she murmured again, gently pressing the fabric against the injury. "I'm almost finished." The enormous wolf continued watching her. Somewhere deep inside the haze clouding its instincts, something about her voice felt strangely familiar. Not her face, not her scent, only the warmth carried within every quiet word. Broken images flickered through its fractured memory. A towering stone castle, silver banners dancing above ancient walls, thousands of warriors kneeling. Then darkness swallowed everything again. The wolf blinked hard, frustrated by memories that vanished before they could become clear. Grace noticed the distant look in its eyes. "You don't know where you came from either, do you?" she asked softly. The question escaped before she realized how closely it mirrored her own heart. Ever since the rejection ceremony, she had often wondered where someone was supposed to belong after the place they once called home no longer wanted them. The wolf slowly lowered its head again. Grace smiled faintly. "Then I suppose we're both a little lost." She disappeared briefly into the farmhouse before returning with a wooden bowl filled with fresh water and another containing shredded roasted chicken left over from the previous evening's supper. She placed both several feet away before carefully stepping back. "You don't have to trust me yet." The wolf watched her for several long moments before cautiously dragging its injured body toward the bowls. Every movement revealed how deeply exhausted it had become. It drank first, long and desperately, then paused before touching the food. Grace remained perfectly still. Finally, the wolf accepted the meal without taking its eyes off her. Relief quietly softened her face. "That's better." Throughout the afternoon, she repaired the coop door damaged by the wolf's unexpected arrival, while the hens slowly regained enough confidence to wander around their unusual guest. Strangely, the wolf ignored every chicken completely. One curious hen even perched on a nearby crate beside its massive tail, earning nothing more than a tired glance. Grace laughed for the first time in weeks. "You're much gentler than you look." The wolf lifted its head slightly after hearing the sound. Another faint image surfaced. Someone laughing. Sunlight reflecting against polished marble. A woman's voice, warm, familiar. Then pain exploded behind its eyes. The wolf staggered backward, breathing heavily. Grace immediately knelt beside it without thinking. "Easy." She rested one gentle hand near its uninjured shoulder, careful not to touch the wound. "Whatever you're remembering, you don't have to force it." The pounding inside its head slowly eased beneath the steady rhythm of her calm voice. As evening settled across the quiet valley, Grace spread an old wool blanket over fresh straw inside the coop before carrying a small lantern toward the farmhouse. She stopped at the doorway and looked back. The wolf remained awake, watching her beneath the golden light. "You probably need a name," she said thoughtfully. "I can't keep calling you Wolf." She studied the soft gray markings hidden beneath the white fur. "How about Ash?" The wolf tilted its head ever so slightly. Grace smiled. "Ash it is." She wished him good night before closing the farmhouse door. Long after every window went dark, the great white wolf remained awake beneath the quiet roof of the chicken coop. The strange name echoed gently through the emptiness inside its mind. Ash. Not quite right, yet somehow comforting. Far beyond the peaceful farm, royal riders continued searching through forests under torchlight, while messengers spread across the kingdom carrying desperate orders from the palace. None of them imagined that the missing Alpha King had fallen asleep beside a flock of ordinary hens, protected not by an army, but by the quiet kindness of a rejected Omega who believed every wounded soul deserved a chance to heal. The next several days settled into a quiet rhythm neither Grace Bennett nor the great white wolf had expected. Every sunrise began the same way. Grace carried fresh water to the chicken coop, replaced the wolf's bandages with careful hands, and scattered grain for the hens while softly talking about ordinary things that required no answers. She spoke about the weather, the stubborn rooster who believed he ruled the farm, the tomatoes that refused to ripen, and the little creek that always sounded louder after rain. The wolf never replied, yet its silver eyes followed every movement as though each simple word was slowly stitching together something broken deep inside its mind. By the fourth morning, Grace noticed the wound across its shoulder had begun closing beautifully. "You're healing much faster than any normal wolf," she whispered while changing the linen strip around the injury. The wolf remained perfectly still, trusting her enough not to pull away. When she finished, she instinctively brushed a loose strand of white fur away from its forehead. For a brief second, the wolf leaned gently into her touch before seeming almost startled by its own reaction. Grace smiled. "I think you're beginning to like me, Ash." Hearing the name again awakened another fractured memory. A grand hall filled with silver pillars. A black throne carved with wolves. A crown resting upon dark velvet. Voices calling, "Your Majesty." The images flashed like lightning before disappearing into darkness once more. The wolf suddenly staggered backward, breathing harder as another sharp pain exploded through its head. Grace immediately stepped closer. "Ash." She knelt beside him without hesitation. "Look at me." The wolf's restless eyes finally found hers. "There you are," she said gently. "Stay here with me." Somehow her calm voice cut through the storm inside its mind. The pain slowly faded. The terrifying images dissolved until only Grace remained clearly visible. She let out a relieved breath. "Whatever happened to you? You don't have to remember everything today." Later that afternoon, Grace repaired a broken section of the wooden fence surrounding the vegetable garden. She laughed quietly after noticing the enormous wolf limping behind her like an oversized shadow. "You know," she teased while hammering another board into place, "most wolves don't spend their days following lonely omegas around chicken farms." The wolf tilted its head, earning another soft laugh from her. Without warning, the sound of frightened squawking erupted from the far side of the coop. Grace turned just in time to see a hungry wild fox slipping beneath the fence toward the hens. Before she could react, the white wolf exploded into motion. Despite the healing wound, it crossed the yard with astonishing speed, placing itself between the predator and the terrified chickens. One thunderous growl echoed across the valley. The fox froze instantly before fleeing into the forest without looking back. The hens gathered fearlessly around the white wolf as though they somehow understood he had protected them. Grace hurried across the yard, relief flooding her face. "You're hurt," she exclaimed, noticing a fresh line of blood where the wound had reopened slightly during the sudden sprint. The wolf ignored its own pain entirely, continuing to watch the tree line until every trace of danger disappeared. Only then did it finally allow Grace to guide it back toward the coop. As she cleaned the reopened cut, she shook her head with an affectionate smile. "You really are impossible." The wolf looked at her quietly. "Impossible?" Another word stirred something buried. A woman's warm laughter. "You're impossible, Ethan." The name echoed faintly through the empty corridors of memory before fading away again. "Ethan." The wolf closed its eyes tightly, trying desperately to hold on to it. It vanished like mist. That evening, Grace sat on the porch while the sunset painted the hills with shades of gold and crimson. Ash rested nearby beneath the old oak tree, watching the chickens settle safely inside their coop. "You know," Grace said softly into the peaceful silence, "I used to think I was the only one who had lost everything." She looked toward the wolf with a gentle smile touched by sadness. "Maybe we found each other because lonely hearts always seem to recognize one another." The wolf slowly lifted its head. Somewhere beneath the forgotten titles, shattered memories, and endless darkness clouding its identity, one certainty remained stronger than all the confusion surrounding it. It still didn't remember who it was. But somehow, without understanding why, it already knew that wherever Grace Bennett was, that place felt more like home than anything its fading memories had managed to return. Rain arrived before sunrise and wrapped Pine Hollow in a silver curtain that blurred the distant hills into shadows. Grace Bennett stood beneath the porch roof, watching gentle drops ripple across puddles while Ash rested near the chicken coop, his white fur now clean enough to gleam even beneath the gray sky. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since she had found him asleep among her frightened hens. The terrible wounds covering his shoulder had almost disappeared, yet something invisible still refused to heal. Every night he dreamed. Every night he woke before dawn, breathing hard. His silver eyes filled with fear he could neither explain nor escape. Grace had begun leaving the farmhouse doors slightly open after the first nightmare. Somehow, whenever Ash heard her quiet footsteps crossing the yard, the panic faded before it could consume him completely. That morning, she carried a steaming bowl of broth toward him. "I thought this might help," she said softly as she placed it beside him. You can't live on chicken forever, even if my hens seem convinced you've become one of them. A faint warmth softened her smile as several hens wandered fearlessly around the enormous wolf, pecking at scattered grain only inches from his paws. Ash lowered his head to the bowl before pausing. His ears suddenly twitched. Somewhere beyond the steady rhythm of rain, another sound echoed inside his mind. Steel striking steel. Hundreds of boots marching in perfect formation. A commanding voice shouting orders across an enormous battlefield. His heartbeat quickened. Images burst through the darkness without warning. Crimson banners whipping violently in the wind. A broken sword. Blood across white stone. Men kneeling. Someone crying, "Protect the king." Ash staggered backward as another wave of pain tore through his head. The wooden bowl slipped beneath one powerful paw and rolled across the muddy yard. Grace reached him almost instantly. "Ash." She knelt beside him despite the rain soaking her clothes. Without hesitation, she rested one hand gently against the thick fur along his neck. "You're safe. Look at me." His frantic breathing slowly matched the calm rhythm of her voice. The battlefield disappeared. The screams faded. Only Grace remained. He leaned his forehead lightly against her shoulder, exhausted by memories that arrived like lightning and vanished before he could understand them. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, quietly stroking the damp white fur. "Whatever you're searching for," she whispered, "I hope it finds you when you're ready, not when you're afraid." Later that afternoon, the rain finally stopped. Sunlight slipped through the clouds, filling the farm with the fresh scent of wet earth and pine. Grace spent the afternoon planting herbs beside the garden while Ash followed at a respectful distance, never wandering far. More than once she caught him staring toward the forest as though expecting someone to emerge from the trees. "Are you waiting for your family?" she asked gently. The wolf remained silent. Grace smiled sadly. "If they love you, I hope they find you someday." The words lingered in the quiet air long after she returned to her work. For reasons he could not explain, the thought of leaving made something inside his chest ache far more than the broken memories ever had. As evening settled across the valley, Grace sat on the old wooden fence overlooking the pasture. Ash lay beside her beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. Neither needed conversation. The silence between them had become comfortable, almost familiar. After several peaceful minutes, Grace finally spoke. "Do you know what I miss most?" she asked quietly. "Not having a pack. Not belonging somewhere." She looked toward the distant mountains before smiling to herself. "But lately, this little farm doesn't feel quite as lonely anymore." Ash lifted his head. The warmth in her voice stirred another memory unlike the others. There was no war, no throne, no blood, only laughter shared with someone he could never quite see. A feeling of peace. A feeling almost identical to the one he felt sitting beside Grace beneath the evening sky. For the first time since awakening without a name, he realized something remarkable. He still could not remember who he had been. But each passing day beside the rejected Omega was quietly teaching him the kind of man he wanted to become, and somewhere beyond the borders of Pine Hollow, riders bearing the royal crest were following a trail that grew clearer with every sunrise, drawing steadily closer to the peaceful little farm where a forgotten king had unknowingly begun finding himself again. Morning sunlight spilled across Pine Hollow with a warmth that made the little farm feel untouched by the troubles of the outside world. Grace Bennett stepped onto the porch carrying a basket of fresh vegetables, smiling as she watched Ash stretch lazily beneath the old oak tree before following her across the yard with the quiet loyalty he had never questioned. The enormous white wolf no longer moved like a wounded wanderer. His strength had almost completely returned, yet he never strayed beyond the fence unless Grace walked beside him. It was as though some forgotten instinct insisted that wherever she went was exactly where he belonged. "You're becoming spoiled," Grace teased, glancing over her shoulder as she headed toward the vegetable patch. "One day you'll remember you're supposed to be a fierce wolf instead of my oversized farmhand." Ash answered by gently nudging her shoulder with his nose, nearly making her lose balance. She laughed, shaking her head. "See? Completely spoiled." The sound of her laughter lingered across the quiet valley, and for an instant something inside Ash settled peacefully. The endless emptiness where his memories should have been no longer felt unbearable whenever she smiled. Later that afternoon, Grace struggled to lift a heavy bundle of firewood beside the barn. Before she could bend again, Ash stepped forward, clamped the thick rope tied around the bundle between his powerful jaws, and effortlessly dragged it toward the porch. Grace blinked in surprise before laughing again. "Now you're showing off." The wolf stood proudly beside the neatly stacked firewood, earning an affectionate scratch behind one ear. "Thank you." He closed his eyes beneath her gentle touch, and another distant fragment surfaced. A little girl laughing while scratching behind the ears of a younger white wolf. A deep male voice saying, "A true king protects before he commands." The words echoed through his mind before dissolving into silence. He opened his eyes, frustrated that every answer slipped away before he could reach it. Grace noticed the familiar sadness returning to his silver eyes. "Another dream?" she asked softly. Ash lowered his head. "I wish I knew how to help you remember," she whispered. "But maybe memories come back when they stop being chased." Before he could respond in the only way he knew, by quietly resting beside her, the peaceful afternoon shattered beneath frantic squawking. 3 wild dogs had slipped through a broken section of fencing and charged directly toward the chicken coop. The terrified hens scattered in every direction. Grace instinctively ran toward them without thinking. "No," she cried. One of the wild dogs lunged toward her. It never reached her. Ash exploded across the yard with breathtaking speed, placing himself between Grace and the attackers. A single earth-shaking roar rolled across the valley. The wild dogs froze, startled by a predator far beyond anything they had expected. The largest foolishly attacked anyway. Within seconds, Ash disarmed it with overwhelming strength, throwing it harmlessly into the dirt before standing protectively in front of Grace. The remaining dogs fled into the forest without daring to look back. Silence returned almost as suddenly as it had disappeared. Grace's hands trembled as she slowly approached him. "Ash," she reached toward his face. "You protected me." The wolf turned to make certain she was unharmed before gently pressing his forehead against hers. Grace smiled through tears she hadn't realized were forming. "I don't know who you were before you came here," she whispered, "but I know exactly who you are now." Hidden among the trees beyond the farm, 3 armored riders watched the entire encounter without revealing themselves. The silver wolf crest engraved upon their cloaks glinted beneath the afternoon sun. Their captain stared in disbelief at the magnificent white wolf standing beside the rejected Omega. "It cannot be," he murmured. One younger soldier looked equally stunned. "Commander, that's him, isn't it?" The older warrior never took his eyes off the wolf. After weeks of searching, he answered quietly, "We've finally found our missing Alpha King." Yet instead of riding forward, he raised one hand, silently ordering his men to remain hidden. He had just witnessed the most feared ruler in the kingdom risk his own life to save a lonely Omega and a flock of ordinary chickens, and for reasons he could not yet explain. The legendary king had looked happier on that humble little farm than he ever had upon the throne. The following morning began with an uneasy silence that Grace Bennet could not explain. Even the cheerful hens wandered quietly through the yard, as though they sensed an invisible change drifting toward the little farm. Ash stood near the broken fence he had defended the day before, his silver eyes fixed on the forest beyond the rolling hills. For the first time since arriving at the farm, he seemed restless. Every breeze carried unfamiliar scents that stirred something buried deep inside him. Leather, steel, horses, home. Grace noticed him staring into the trees while she gathered fresh herbs from the garden. "You've been watching the forest all morning," she said gently. "Do you feel like someone is coming?" Ash slowly turned toward her, but did not move. Somewhere inside his fractured mind, instinct whispered that he was waiting for someone important, though he could no longer remember why. Before Grace could say anything else, a distant horn echoed through the valley. One long, haunting note rolled across the hills. Ash froze. His breathing changed. Instantly, another horn answered from farther away. Then another. Images crashed into his mind with terrifying force. A massive fortress surrounded by towering stone walls. Thousands of warriors raising silver banners marked with the crest of a white wolf. A throne carved from ancient oak. His own voice issuing calm commands. "Protect the borders. No innocent shall suffer." He staggered backward, a painful growl escaping his throat as memories collided against the emptiness inside his mind. Grace rushed to his side. "Ash," she cried, reaching for him. The moment her fingers touched his shoulder, another memory burst into existence. A royal council chamber. Generals bowing. A trusted captain kneeling before him. "Your Majesty, the northern pass is secure." The words echoed so clearly that the world around him seemed to disappear. His heart pounded violently. Grace looked into his frightened eyes. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Whatever you're seeing, you're not alone." Suddenly the sound of galloping horses thundered toward the farm. 6 armored riders emerged from the forest and stopped several yards beyond the wooden gate. Silver cloaks fluttered behind them. Every shield carried the same white wolf crest that had haunted Ash's broken memories. Grace instinctively stepped in front of him. "Who are you?" she called, her voice steady despite the fear rising inside her. The oldest rider slowly removed his helmet. His weathered face filled with disbelief the instant he saw the great white wolf standing beside the rejected Omega. He dropped to one knee without hesitation. The remaining soldiers followed immediately. "Your Majesty," the commander said, his voice trembling with relief. "We have searched every kingdom for you." Grace stared at the kneeling warriors in complete confusion. "Your Majesty." The words barely left her lips before Ash's entire body stiffened. The commander continued speaking. "The kingdom believed you had fallen during the ambush 3 weeks ago. The council has held the throne empty ever since." Something inside Ash shattered. The final wall protecting his lost memories collapsed all at once. He saw the ambush beneath the blood-red moon. Betrayers attacking from every side, transforming into his wolf to escape, running through forests while wounded, collapsing inside a humble chicken coop. Then he remembered his name. Ethan Walker. Alpha King of the Silver Moon Kingdom. Every face, every battle, every responsibility returned with overwhelming clarity. His breathing steadied. Slowly, the great white wolf stepped away from Grace. Silver light surrounded his body, flowing like moonlit water across his fur. Within moments, the enormous wolf disappeared, replaced by a tall man with dark hair, pale skin, and piercing silver eyes. Though dressed only in the simple clothes Grace had found inside an old storage chest weeks earlier, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone born to command armies. Grace stood frozen, unable to speak. Ethan looked down at his own hands before lifting his eyes to hers. For several heartbreaking seconds, neither of them moved. The commander lowered his head respectfully. "Welcome home, Alpha King." But Ethan barely heard the words. The kingdom had finally found its missing ruler. Yet as his memories returned completely, he realized the greatest fear in his heart was no longer the enemies waiting beyond the mountains. It was the possibility that remembering who he had been might force him to leave behind the one person who had taught him who he truly was. Silence settled over the little farm after the commander spoke the words that changed everything. "Welcome home, Alpha King." Grace Bennett stood motionless beside the vegetable garden, her hands trembling as she looked at the man who only moments earlier had been the gentle white wolf she had called Ash. Ethan Walker slowly turned toward her, his silver eyes carrying every memory that had returned. The confusion was gone. The uncertainty had vanished. Yet one emotion remained exactly the same. Every time he looked at Grace, warmth still overcame the weight of his crown. The commander rose respectfully and stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the council awaits your return. The kingdom has nearly fallen into chaos. Several neighboring alphas have begun testing our borders, believing you to be dead." Ethan listened, without interrupting. His face remained calm, but his attention drifted back toward Grace, who quietly lowered her eyes. She suddenly understood why the wolf had healed so quickly, why ordinary predators fled before him, and why his presence had always carried quiet authority even without words. She gave a small, bittersweet smile. "So, Ash was never really your name." Ethan walked toward her, stopping only a few feet away. "No," he answered softly. His human voice was deep and gentle, exactly as she had imagined it would be during all the evenings they had spent beneath the old oak tree. "But when I couldn't remember who I was, it became part of me because you gave it to me." Grace nodded, trying to hide the ache growing inside her chest. "I'm glad I could help." The simple sentence hurt Ethan far more than any battlefield wound he had ever endured. It sounded like goodbye. Before he could answer, one of the younger soldiers looked around the humble farm with visible confusion. "Your Majesty, you've been living here?" Another quietly added, unable to hide his surprise. With a rejected Omega? Several of the soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. None dared openly question their king, yet disbelief spread across their faces. Ethan noticed every expression. His silver eyes hardened instantly. "Mind your thoughts before your words," he said calmly. The entire group lowered their heads. This woman sheltered her king when the kingdom could not. She protected me when I had nothing. She asked for no reward. Show her the respect you would show me. Not another soldier spoke. Grace looked at Ethan in stunned silence. No one had defended her publicly since the day of her rejection. The commander stepped forward and bowed respectfully toward her. "Lady Grace, on behalf of the Silver Moon Kingdom, you have our deepest gratitude." Grace quickly shook her head. "Please, I only helped someone who was hurt." Ethan smiled faintly. "Exactly," the commander reluctantly interrupted. "Your Majesty, we truly cannot delay much longer." Ethan looked across the farm one final time. The weathered chicken coop where he had awakened without memories. The vegetable garden, where Grace had laughed while teaching him ordinary happiness. The old oak tree beneath which he had discovered peace before remembering power. Every corner of the humble property now carried more meaning than the palace he had ruled for years. Grace quietly stepped back. "You should go." Ethan frowned slightly. "Grace." She forced another smile. "Your people need their king." Her voice remained steady despite the tears threatening to appear. "Besides, you finally remembered where you belong." Ethan stared at her for several long seconds before answering with quiet certainty. "I remembered who I was." He paused, never taking his eyes from hers. "Where I belong is something entirely different." The words stole her breath. Before either of them could continue, a messenger rode desperately into the yard, his horse covered in foam from exhaustion. He dismounted and fell to one knee before Ethan. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but we've received urgent news. Lord Victor Blackthorn has declared himself regent during your disappearance. He refuses to surrender the capital unless he sees you with his own eyes." The commander cursed under his breath. Ethan's expression darkened. He remembered Victor perfectly now. A trusted noble, a respected advisor, and the very man who had secretly organized the ambush beneath the blood-red moon. Betrayal had nearly destroyed the kingdom while he wandered through the forest without a name. Ethan slowly turned toward the distant mountains where his palace stood beyond the horizon. Then he looked back at Grace. The peaceful life they had unknowingly built together had come to an end, but another battle had only just begun, and this time he refused to face it without remembering the quiet Omega whose kindness had restored far more than his memories. She had restored the heart of a king. The journey back to Silver Moon Castle lasted 2 long days. Yet Ethan Walker felt farther from home. With every mile his horse carried him away from Pine Hollow. Behind him, the little farmhouse disappeared beyond the hills until only memory remained. The old chicken coop, the weathered porch, Grace Bennett standing quietly in the morning light, pretending to smile so he would leave without carrying the weight of her tears. None of those images left his mind. His commanders rode several paces behind, wisely allowing their king the silence he needed. They had expected relief after finding their missing ruler. Instead, they watched a man who had recovered his memories while leaving behind the only place where he had truly remembered peace. By sunset, the towering walls of Silver Moon Castle rose above the valley exactly as they had in Ethan's returning memories. Thousands of soldiers lined the road leading to the gates. The moment they recognized their king, every warrior dropped to one knee. "Long live the Alpha King!" Their voices thundered across the stone courtyard. Ethan acknowledged them with a respectful nod, yet his expression remained thoughtful rather than triumphant. Inside the great hall, the royal council stood waiting beneath silver banners embroidered with the white wolf crest. Some nobles looked genuinely relieved. Others struggled to hide their disappointment that the king they had quietly hoped would never return now stood before them once again. Lord Victor Blackthorn stepped forward wearing expensive ceremonial robes and a carefully practiced smile. "Your Majesty," he said warmly, bowing with flawless elegance. "Words cannot express how grateful we are to see you alive." Ethan studied the man without speaking. During the weeks he had wandered without memories, Victor had declared himself regent and quietly expanded his influence over nearly every branch of government. Before losing his memory, Ethan had trusted him completely. Now every recovered memory revealed details he had overlooked for years. Small manipulations, convenient political alliances, decisions that benefited one family more than the kingdom itself. "Rise," Ethan said calmly. Victor obeyed, never noticing the dangerous certainty hidden behind the king's composed expression. The council meeting lasted for hours. Reports filled the chamber. Border disputes, food shortages, noble petitions, military concerns. Ethan listened carefully, answering every issue with the same quiet wisdom that had once earned the loyalty of an entire kingdom. Yet beneath every decision, another promise quietly guided his thoughts. Grace would not remain forgotten. As the meeting finally ended, Captain Rowan entered carrying a leather folder sealed with the Royal Investigative Crest. Ethan accepted it immediately. "You asked us to examine Miss Grace Bennett's background before your disappearance," Rowan explained. "We continued after you were found." Ethan opened the file. Every page tightened something inside his chest. Grace had not simply been rejected by her former pack. Witnesses described a public humiliation arranged by powerful families seeking political marriages. Her former alpha had abandoned their destined bond to strengthen his position through wealth and influence. Several records had even been altered afterward to justify the decision. Ethan slowly closed the folder. Who approved this? Rowan hesitated only briefly. The documents carry Lord Victor Blackthorne's authorization. Silence settled over the room. Ethan lifted his eyes toward the council chamber doors through which Victor had only recently departed. At that exact moment, pieces of another forgotten memory suddenly aligned. The ambush beneath the blood-red moon. The attackers had known his exact route. They had known his escort numbers. They had known the hour he would cross the northern forest. Information only a handful of trusted advisors possessed. Ethan's silver eyes hardened. The conspiracy had never been about a single rejected Omega. It reached far deeper than he had imagined. Victor Blackthorne had manipulated justice long before attempting to seize the throne itself. Ethan rose from his chair with calm determination. "Captain Rowan, Your Majesty," quietly summoned the royal guard. Rowan immediately understood. "Tonight." Ethan nodded once. No announcements. No arrests yet. He looked toward the tall palace windows where the moon had begun rising above the kingdom he had sworn to protect. "First, prepare my horse." Rowan blinked. "Your Majesty?" Ethan's voice softened for the first time that evening. "Before I can restore justice to this kingdom." A faint smile touched his face as the memory of a humble chicken coop returned with perfect clarity. "There is someone waiting in Pine Hollow who deserves to hear the truth from me before she hears it from anyone else." And beneath the same moon that had once witnessed a forgotten king sleeping among frightened hens, Ethan silently vowed that the next time he stood before Grace Bennett, he would come not as a wounded wolf searching for memories, but as the Alpha King determined to change both of their futures forever. The first light of dawn spread across Pine Hollow just as Grace Bennett finished feeding the hens outside the little chicken coop where everything had begun. Life had returned to its familiar rhythm. Yet every quiet morning reminded her of the white wolf who had once slept among the straw and the man who had ridden away carrying both a crown and a piece of her heart. She never regretted helping him. She only wished she had been brave enough to tell him that the lonely farm no longer felt like home after he had gone. The distant sound of horses interrupted her thoughts. Grace looked toward the old road, expecting traveling merchants. Instead, dozens of royal guards appeared over the hill, their silver banners glowing beneath the morning sun. At their center rode Ethan Walker, no longer dressed as a wandering stranger, but wearing the simple black ceremonial coat of the Alpha King. He had deliberately left behind the jeweled crown, choosing to arrive as the man Grace had first come to know rather than the ruler the kingdom feared. The entire village gathered in stunned silence as the royal escort stopped before the weathered farmhouse. Ethan dismounted without waiting for anyone to announce him. His silver eyes found Grace immediately. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The little chicken coop stood quietly behind them, exactly as it had on the morning their lives first crossed. Captain Rowan stepped forward and unrolled a royal decree. By order of His Majesty Ethan Walker, Alpha King of the Silver Moon Kingdom, the rejection of Omega Grace Bennett is declared unlawful and permanently void. The investigation has proven that powerful nobles manipulated sacred records for political gain. All responsible parties, including Lord Victor Blackthorne and those who conspired with him, have been stripped of rank and placed under arrest to stand trial before the Royal Council. Shock spread through the crowd. Villagers who had once avoided Grace lowered their heads in shame. Ethan accepted the decree from Rowan before walking toward Grace himself. "You deserved justice long before today," he said quietly. "I'm only sorry it took me losing my memories to finally see how much had been stolen from you." Grace felt tears gather in her eyes. "You remembered everything," she whispered. Ethan smiled gently. "Not everything." She looked at him with quiet confusion. "There is one memory I never truly lost." He glanced toward the old chicken coop where frightened hens had once watched a wounded wolf collapse among them. "Even when I couldn't remember my own name, I always remembered how it felt to be safe beside you." Grace could no longer hide her tears. Ethan stepped closer until only a respectful distance remained between them. "When I woke without a kingdom, you gave me kindness. When I had no identity, you gave me a name. When my heart carried only confusion, you gave it peace." His voice remained calm, yet every word carried complete certainty. "I thought finding my memories would lead me home. Instead, they led me back here." He slowly extended one hand toward her. "Grace Bennett, will you walk beside me, not because a bond commands it, not because a crown requires it, but because my heart freely chooses you every single day?" Grace looked at his outstretched hand before smiling through happy tears. "Yes," she answered softly, "but only if you promise one thing." Ethan's eyes warmed. "Anything." She laughed quietly, the same gentle laugh that had first calmed a frightened wolf. "No matter how busy the kingdom becomes, you'll still help me feed the chickens." For the first time in many years, the Alpha King laughed without restraint. "I think I can manage that." As their hands finally met, warm sunlight spilled across the little farm, illuminating the humble chicken coop where destiny had quietly rewritten 2 broken lives. Months later, travelers crossing the kingdom often told an unusual story. They spoke of an Alpha King who personally visited forgotten villages, who judged the powerless with the same respect as the noble, and who never mocked simple places because everyone knew the greatest treasure he had ever found was not hidden inside a palace. It had been waiting inside an old chicken coop where a rejected Omega had looked beyond fear, beyond appearances, and beyond power to see nothing more than a wounded soul in need of compassion. Ethan never forgot that lesson. Grace never stopped believing that kindness mattered. Together they proved that destiny does not always arrive with thunder, crowns, or ancient prophecies. Sometimes it quietly wanders into a weathered chicken coop with no memories at all, waiting for the right heart to help it remember what truly matters.